Greenwich Village, 1990. A man in a tattered bathrobe and slippers shuffles down Sullivan Street, mumbling to himself. Tourists snap photos, laughing. Neighbors cross to the other side, eyes down. Children point. An elderly woman shakes her head in pity. But 3 blocks away, in an unmarked van packed with surveillance equipment, FBI agents watch through telephoto lenses. And they know the truth. This crazy man, this neighborhood spectacle in worn terry cloth and scuff leather, commands the most powerful crime family in America. He controls unions, construction contracts, garbage routes, and shipping docks. He orders murders with a whisper. He moves millions of dollars with a nod. Vincent Gigante is insane. He's winning. Vincent Louis Gigante was born on March 29, 1928, in the poverty-stricken tenements of New York's Lower East Side. The neighborhood reeked of fish markets and coal smoke. Laundry hung between fire escapes like flags of surrender. His father, Salvatore, was an honest watchmaker who'd immigrated from Naples with nothing but calloused hands and fading hope. His mother, Yolanda, worked as a seamstress, stitching together fabric and dreams in their cramped, roach-infested apartment on the 4th floor of a crumbling walk-up. They had 5 sons, who would enter the Mafia, drawn to power like moths to a flame. One, Louis, would become a Catholic priest, kneeling before altars while his brothers knelt before bosses. Vincent, the middle child with his pronounced chin and quiet, calculating intensity, fell somewhere in between, at least at first. His mother called him Cinzino, a tender nickname derived from Vincenzo, the Italian form of Vincent. The streets, brutal and efficient, shortened it to the chin. It would become one of the most feared names in American organized crime. As a teenager, Vincent wasn't drawn to the classroom. School meant sitting still, following rules, accepting a future of poverty dressed up as honest work. He dropped out of textile high school and turned to the only profession that seemed to promise escape: boxing. Between 1944 and 1947, he fought as a professional light heavyweight, stepping into smoke-filled rings across New York and New Jersey. He was tough, disciplined, relentless. His fists were fast. His chin, that famous chin, could take punishment that would drop lesser men. He fought 25 times, including matches at Madison Square Garden, the cathedral of the sport. But he wasn't great. He lost 4 matches, including his first professional bout against Vic Chambers in Union City, New Jersey, and his last against Jimmy Slade in Brooklyn, a technical knockout that left him bleeding and humiliated. Vincent could take a punch. He could throw one too. But standing in the locker room after that final loss, staring at his swollen face in a cracked mirror, he realized something crucial. The real money wasn't made in the ring, where men broke their body for a few $100s in the fleeting roar of a crowd. It was made in the shadows, where men broke rules and walked away rich. By his late teens, Vincent had caught the attention of Vito Genovese, a rising power in what was then called the Luciano crime family. Genovese was a man of contradictions, charming and vicious, generous and ruthless. He'd helped pay for surgery for Vincent's mother, a gesture that seemed kind but was really an investment, a hook sunk deep. Vincent never forgot it. In return, he became Genovese's protégé, his enforcer, his weapon. Between the ages of 17 and 25, Vincent was arrested 7 times on charges ranging from receiving stolen goods to possession of an unlicensed handgun, illegal gambling, and bookmaking. Most charges were dismissed or settled with small fines. One gambling conviction landed him 60 days in jail, his first real taste of incarceration. But Vincent was learning. He was watching. He was studying how the system worked, where its cracks were, how to exploit them. And he was becoming something far more dangerous than a boxer with fast hands. He was becoming a killer. On May 2nd, 1957, Vincent received an order that would change his life forever. Vito Genovese wanted Frank Costello, the sophisticated, politically connected boss of the Luciano crime family, removed from power. Not necessarily killed, just removed. Vincent waited outside Costello's luxury apartment building on Central Park West, gun tucked inside his jacket, heart pounding against his ribs. It was early evening. Doormen in crisp uniforms stood at attention. Taxis honked. The city hummed with oblivious life. When Costello entered the marble lobby, moving with the confident stride of a man who believed he was untouchable, Vincent stepped forward and raised a gun. "This is for you, Frank," he said, and fired. The bullet grazed Costello's skull, tearing through skin and shattering the polished stillness of the lobby. Blood ran down Costello's temple. He staggered but didn't fall. The wound was superficial, but the message was clear. Your time is over. Costello looked at Vincent, his would-be assassin, and made a choice that would define both their futures. He stepped down. He retired. Genovese took control of what would become the Genovese crime family. And Vincent, despite being identified by a doorman who'd watched the whole thing, walked free when Costello, following the unwritten code of silence, refused to testify. In 1958, Costello stood in court and said he couldn't identify his attacker. Vincent Gigante, at 29 years old, had just become a made man and a legend. If this assassination attempt already sounds insane, subscribe, because Vincent's next 40 years will redefine criminal genius. But legends don't last long without consequences. In 1959, Vincent was convicted alongside Vito Genovese in a massive federal heroin trafficking case. The sentence was 7 years in federal prison. Vincent served 5. During those years behind bars, locked away in a concrete tomb where time moved slowly and violence erupted suddenly, he shared a cell with Genovese himself. They talked in whispers. They planned in code. And Vincent learned the most important lesson of his criminal life. The law could be beaten, but only if you were smart enough, patient enough, ruthless enough to make them think you couldn't be tried. When Vincent was paroled in the mid-1960s, he returned to New York a changed man. He was promoted to captain, running the Greenwich Village crew out of the Triangle Civic Improvement Association, a bland name for a hub of extortion, loan sharking, and violence. But something was different. Something was off. And people started to notice. Neighbors started seeing strange behavior. Vincent, always quiet and reserved, began mumbling to himself on the streets, his words incoherent, his eyes unfocused. He wore a bathrobe and pajamas in public, shuffling down Bleecker Street in slippers like a man lost in his own fractured mind. He'd stop in front of shop windows, staring at his reflection, talking to no one. Friends and family whisper behind closed doors. Was Vincent cracking under the pressure of mob life? Had prison broken something inside him? Had the violence, the paranoia, the endless looking over your shoulder finally shattered his sanity? The truth was far more calculated. In 1969, Vincent was indicted in New Jersey for conspiracy to bribe the entire 5-member Old Tappan police force, attempting to turn law enforcement into his personal surveillance system. It was a serious charge, one that could have sent him back to prison for years. But his lawyers presented psychiatric reports. Vincent, they claimed, was mentally unfit to stand trial. He was sick. He was disabled. He was no threat to anyone, least of all himself. The charges were dropped. The seed was planted. And Vincent Gigante, the enforcer, the killer, the rising power in the Genovese family, wasn't just a gangster anymore. He was a ghost wrapped in insanity, untouchable, invisible, hiding in plain sight. Throughout the 1970s, Vincent climbed the ranks of the Genovese family while maintaining his carefully constructed charade. He was treated 20 times for psychiatric disorders at various hospitals across New York and New Jersey. His primary psychiatrist, Dr. Eugene D'Adamo, diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia with acute exacerbations requiring hospitalization. Medical reports, thick with clinical language and grim prognosis, claimed his IQ was between 69 and 72, well below normal, indicative of severe cognitive impairment. His family, tearful and convincing, insisted he was disabled, broken, a shell of the man he'd once been. Harmless, but behind closed doors, in cramped social clubs that smelled of cigars and old coffee, in dimly lit basements where deals were made and lives were ended, Vincent Gigante was sharp, calculating, and methodically building an empire that would make him the most powerful mob boss in America. In 1981, the acting boss of the Genovese family, Philip Benny Squint Lombardo, stepped down due to poor health. His body was failing. His enemies were circling. With Lombardo's blessing, Vincent became the official boss. But there was a problem. a significant one. The FBI was watching everyone. They had agents embedded in neighborhoods. They had wiretaps on phones. They had informants whispering secrets. So Vincent did something unprecedented in the history of the American Mafia. He installed Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, a loud, gregarious mobster with a love for cigars and attention, as a front boss, a decoy designed to fool law enforcement. To the world, to the press, to the FBI, Salerno ran the Genovese family. He held court. He gave orders. He made decisions. In reality, Vincent pulled every string from the shadows, wandering Greenwich Village in his bathrobe, mumbling nonsense that sounded like madness but was really camouflage, invisible in plain sight, while the FBI chased the wrong man. Throughout the 1980s, Vincent built a vast criminal network that stretched across New York's 5 boroughs and into New Jersey. He controlled massive bookmaking and loan sharking rings that operated out of social clubs, barbershops, and backroom card games. He extorted garbage companies, forcing them to pay protection money or face labor strikes and mysterious fires. He controlled shipping firms at the waterfront, trucking operations that moved goods across state lines, and construction contractors bidding on city projects worth hundreds of millions. He infiltrated labor unions, including the powerful Teamsters and Carpenters unions at the Javits Center, one of New York's premier convention venues. He pocketed payoffs from terrified merchants at the Fulton Fish Market, with a stench of brine and fear hung in the air. He controlled vendors at the Feast of San Gennaro in Little Italy, skimming money from every sausage sold and every game played. He even stole thousands of dollars donated to a neighborhood church, money meant for the poor and sick. The Genovese family, under Vincent's invisible hand, was raking in hundreds of millions of dollars annually. And the FBI, despite their surveillance, their wiretaps, their desperation, couldn't touch him. He was too careful, too smart, too insane, or so it seemed. In 1986, Vincent made a bold, reckless move that nearly changed the landscape of New York organized crime forever. He wanted John Gotti dead. Gotti, the flashy new boss of the Gambino crime family, was everything Vincent despised. He wore expensive suits. He craved media attention. He dined at high-end restaurants and walked red carpets like a celebrity. He was loud, arrogant, and reckless, a walking violation of the old Mafia code. Stay quiet, stay hidden, stay alive. Vincent hated him, so he ordered a hit. On April 13, 1986, a car bomb exploded outside a Brooklyn social club, a blast so powerful it shattered windows 2 blocks away and sent a fireball into the afternoon sky. The bomb killed Frank DeCicco, the Gambino family's underboss, tearing his body apart in an instant. The target was supposed to be Gotti, but he canceled his plans at the last minute. A stroke of luck that saved his life and left Vincent furious. The bomb, planted by members of the Lucchese crime family under Vincent's orders, killed DeCicco and sent a brutal message. Even the most powerful mobsters, even the most protected, weren't safe. Vincent had tried to assassinate a rival boss and almost succeeded. And still, despite investigations, despite witness interviews, despite the FBI's best efforts, no one could prove he'd given the order. He was a ghost. He was untouchable. He was winning. But the FBI wasn't giving up. They couldn't. Vincent Gigante was making them look incompetent, outsmarted, weak. They launched Operation Oddfather, a massive, multi-year surveillance operation targeting Vincent and the Genovese family. They followed him everywhere. They filmed him shuffling down Sullivan Street in his bathrobe, muttering incoherently, stopping to urinate against trees, looking lost and pathetic. They documented every trip to the psychiatrist, every hospitalization, every public appearance that screamed mental incompetence. But they also did something smarter. They installed hidden microphones in Genovese social clubs, tiny listening devices planted in walls, under tables, inside light fixtures. And what they heard on those tapes shocked even veteran investigators who thought they'd seen it all. Vincent Gigante wasn't crazy. Not even close. FBI tapes captured him speaking with perfect clarity, his voice calm and controlled, discussing murders with clinical detachment, reviewing extortion schemes with precision of a CEO, dividing territory like a general planning a campaign. He talked about money, about power, about who needed to be killed and why. His mind was sharp. His orders were precise. In one captured conversation, Vincent's front boss, Fat Tony Salerno, was reviewing a list of prospective candidates to become made members in another crime family. The list didn't include their nicknames, and Salerno, frustrated, shrugged and said, "I'll leave this up to the boss." The boss, not Salerno. Vincent. The tapes were damning. Concrete proof that Vincent was in complete control. But publicly on the streets, in courtrooms, he continued his performance. He shuffled. He mumbled. He drooled on himself. And for years it worked. Because the legal system had a problem. Proving someone is faking insanity is nearly impossible when they're committed enough to the act. In 1987, the federal government launched the Mafia Commission trial, one of the most ambitious prosecutions in the history of organized crime. They targeted the bosses of New York's 5 crime families, charging them with racketeering, extortion, and conspiracy. Anthony Fat Tony Salerno was indicted and convicted, sentenced to 100 years in prison, a life sentence disguised as justice. The government believed Salerno was the boss of the Genovese family, the man in charge, the target worth celebrating. They were wrong. Shortly after the trial, Salerno's longtime right-hand man, Vincent the Fish Cafaro, flipped and became a government informant, trading secrets for a reduced sentence. Cafaro sat across from FBI agents and told them the truth. Salerno was just a front, a puppet, a distraction. The real boss, the man pulling the strings, the one who'd been in control since 1981, was Vincent Gigante. And the Genovese family had been running this elaborate deception since 1969. Nearly 20 years of lies, misdirection, and theater. The FBI had been chasing shadows, wasting resources, celebrating false victories. Vincent had won again, and he'd done it while wearing a bathrobe. Vincent was meticulous, almost obsessive in his caution. He almost never used a phone, paranoid that every line was tapped, every call recorded. When he absolutely had to use one, he spoke softly in code or simply whistled into the receiver, a bizarre tactic that made transcribing conversations nearly impossible. He never left his apartment unoccupied because he knew FBI agents would sneak in and plant bugs and lamps behind picture frames, inside electrical outlets. Genovese members were strictly forbidden to say his name out loud in conversations or phone calls. The rule was absolute. When they had to refer to him, they pointed to their chins or made the letter C with their fingers, a silent language of fear and respect. Vincent Gigante had turned himself into a myth, a legend, a specter that the FBI could see but couldn't capture, couldn't prosecute, couldn't stop. By the early 1990s, with John Gotti in prison and the other New York families weakened by prosecutions and internal warfare, Vincent was widely recognized as the most powerful crime boss in the United States. Some even called him the Capo di Tutti Capi, the boss of all bosses, a title that hadn't existed since 1931, when the commission was formed and hierarchy flattened. Vincent was the exception. He was the king, and he ruled from the shadows. But in 1990, the walls finally began closing in. Federal prosecutors, armed with years of surveillance, wiretaps, and witness testimony, indicted Vincent along with members of 4 of New York's crime families for conspiring to rig bids and extort payoff from contractors on multi-million-dollar contracts with the New York City Housing Authority. From 1978 to 1990, the Genovese family and its partners had rigged 75% of window installation contracts, a scheme worth over $142 million. Contractors were forced to make union payoffs between $1 and $2 for each window installed, money that flowed directly into mob coffers. It was a massive, coordinated conspiracy, a blueprint for corruption, and Vincent was at the center of it, the spider in the web, the architect of theft. When he appeared for his arraignment, the courtroom fell silent. Vincent shuffled in wearing pajamas and a bathrobe, his hair disheveled, his eyes vacant. He mumbled incoherently, seemingly unaware of where he was or why he was there. His lawyers, sharp and expensive, argued he was mentally and physically impaired, incompetent to stand trial, unable to assist in his own defense. Legal battles raged for 7 years. Psychiatrists testified on both sides. Medical reports, hundreds of pages thick, piled up. Vincent's relatives, tearful and convincing, swore he was broken, disabled, lost in a fog of dementia and delusion. The government countered that it was all an act, a performance, a fraud. And neither side could definitively, conclusively, beyond any doubt, prove the other wrong. The case stalled. Delays mounted. And Vincent remained free. Before I reveal what finally brought him down, drop a comment. Was Vincent a genius or just lucky? Let me know below. In 1993, the pressure intensified. Vincent was indicted again, this time on even more serious charges, sanctioning the murders of 6 mobsters and conspiring to kill 3 others, including John Gotti. The indictment read like a horror story, a catalog of violence spanning decades. If convicted, Vincent would spend the rest of his life in prison, dying in a cell far from Greenwich Village. But his defense remained the same. He was insane, incompetent, unable to understand the charges against him, unable to participate in his own trial. Prosecutors were furious, exasperated, desperate. They knew the truth. They had the tapes, clear recordings of Vincent's voice discussing murders and money. They had the evidence, mountains of it. But proving Vincent was faking, that he'd been faking for over 20 years, was another matter entirely. The legal system, designed to protect the rights of the mentally ill, had become Vincent's shield. Then came the turning point, the moment that would finally crack Vincent's carefully constructed facade. In March 1996, at sanity hearings in federal court, 2 former mob bosses took the stand as government witnesses. The courtroom was packed. Reporters scribbled notes. The first witness was Alphonse Lil Al Darko, the former acting boss of the Lucchese crime family, a man who flipped and was now cooperating with prosecutors to save his own skin. Darko testified that Vincent was sharp, focused, and fully in control of high-level Mafia meetings, his mind working like a calculator, making decisions that affected millions of dollars and dozens of lives. The second witness was even more damaging, a bomb that exploded the defense's case. Sammy the Bull Gravano, the former underboss of the Gambino crime family, and the man whose testimony had helped convict John Gotti. Gravano, stocky and blunt, looked directly at the jury and said something that would change everything. Vincent was the smartest boss I ever met. He was sharp, careful, always 10 steps ahead. Everything, the bathrobe, the mumbling, all of it, was an act. He fooled me for years. He fooled everyone. But he wasn't crazy. He was brilliant. The courtroom went silent. Reporters stopped writing. Jurors leaned forward. Vincent sat in a wheelchair, slumped over, drooling slightly, his eyes half closed, staring blankly ahead as if he hadn't heard a single word. But the jury had heard, and they believed Gravano. In August 1996, Senior Judge Eugene Nickerson ruled that Vincent Gigante was mentally competent to stand trial. The legal battle was over. The trial was on. Vincent's lawyers, desperate, fought back. They presented reports from psychiatrists claiming Vincent had been hospitalized 28 times between 1969 and 1995 for hallucinations, paranoia, and dementia rooted in organic brain damage. They claimed his condition was real, deteriorating, terminal. But the judge didn't buy it. He'd heard the tapes. He'd seen the evidence. The trial was set for June 1997. On June 25, 1997, Vincent's trial began in a packed federal courtroom in Manhattan. He sat in a wheelchair, slumped over dramatically, his mouth hanging open, mumbling incoherently, occasionally drooling on himself. His lawyers maintained he was too sick, too broken, too mentally disabled to understand proceedings against him. But prosecutors presented a devastating case. FBI surveillance tapes played in open court, Vincent's voice clear and controlled as he discussed murders and extortion. Testimony from informants who'd attended meetings where Vincent gave orders with precision. Financial records showing his control over unions, construction rackets, and garbage routes. For almost 3 days, the jury deliberated, locked in a room, weighing evidence, arguing, trying to separate truth from performance. On July 25, 1997, they returned to the courtroom. The foreman stood. The verdict was read. Guilty. Guilty of conspiring to murder mobsters. Guilty of running the Genovese crime family as a criminal enterprise. guilty of racketeering, extortion, and corruption. After 30 years of deception, after thousands of hours shuffling in a bathrobe, after countless psychiatric evaluations and hospitalizations, Vincent Gigante had finally been convicted. This trial will shock you. Keep watching to see how it ends. On December 18, 1997, Vincent was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and fined $1.25 million. Judge Jack B. Weinstein, who handed down the sentence, called it lenient due to Vincent's age, 69 years old, and his apparent frailty. But he also said something that echoed to the courtroom and made headlines across the country. Vincent Gigante has finally been brought to bay in his declining years after decades of vicious criminal tyranny. The odd father, the enigma in the bathrobe, the man who'd outsmarted the FBI for 3 decades, was going to federal prison. But even then, even behind bars, even with the world watching, Vincent didn't stop. From his prison cell, he continued to run the Genovese family, sending orders to his son, Andrew, who visited him regularly, carrying messages, maintaining control, keeping the empire alive. In January 2002, federal prosecutors indicted Vincent again, this time for obstruction of justice. They accused him of continuing to rule the Genovese family from prison, using Andrew as a messenger, maintaining his grip on power despite his incarceration. They also wanted him held responsible for causing a 7-year delay in his previous trial by feigning insanity, a fraud that had cost taxpayers millions and made a mockery of the justice system. Several days later, Andrew was released on $2.5 million bail, a staggering amount that showed the stakes. Prosecutors had more tapes, devastating recordings showing Vincent fully coherent, careful, intelligent, running crime operations from behind bars. Faced with this mountain of evidence, faced with the possibility of his son and other family members going to prison for decades, Vincent made a decision that stunned the criminal underworld and shocked prosecutors who thought they'd seen everything. On April 7, 2003, just hours before his trial was set to begin, Vincent Gigante entered a federal courtroom and pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice. And for the first time in over 30 years, for the first time since 1969, he admitted the truth. He had faked insanity. All of it. The bathrobe, the slippers, the mumbling, the drooling, the psychiatric hospitalizations, the medical reports, the tearful testimony from family members. All of it was a lie, a performance, a decades-long con designed to keep him out of prison, to keep him in power, to keep him winning. Federal prosecutor Rosalyn R. Moskop stood before the judge and said words that would define Vincent's legacy. The jig is up. Vincent Gigante was a cunning faker, and those of us in law enforcement always knew this was an act. The act ran for decades, but today it's over. Vincent was sentenced to an additional 3 years in prison. His son, Andrew, was sentenced to 2 years and fined $2.5 million for racketeering and extortion. The New York Times, in a scathing article, called Vincent's plea deal an unprecedented capitulation for a mafia boss. Bosses didn't plead guilty. They didn't admit weakness. They didn't show vulnerability. But Vincent had no choice. The game was over. The curtain had fallen. As part of the plea agreement, Vincent's relatives, including his wife Olympia, his longtime mistress and common-law wife, also named Olympia, and even his brother, Father Louis Gigante, a Catholic priest who'd publicly defended Vincent for years, were granted immunity from obstruction of justice charges. Vincent had protected his family one last time, sacrificing himself to spare them. On December 19, 2005, Vincent, the Chin Gigante, died at the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. He was 77 years old. 4 days later, on December 23rd, he was buried at St. Anthony of Padua Church in Greenwich Village, the same neighborhood where he'd shuffled in his bathrobe for decades, the same streets where he'd built an empire, the same community that had watched him, feared him, and wondered if he was crazy or brilliant. The funeral was quiet, almost anonymous, attended by family and a handful of old friends. The man who'd once been called the boss of all bosses, the most powerful mob boss in America, left this world with barely a whisper. But his legacy remains, impossible to erase. Vincent Gigante ran the Genovese crime family for over 20 years while convincing the world, the FBI, prosecutors, judges, juries, and even fellow mobsters that he was insane. He controlled billions of dollars in illegal operations spanning gambling, extortion, union corruption, and construction rackets. He ordered murders, bombings, and acts of violence that reshaped New York's criminal underworld. He outsmarted the FBI for 3 decades, appearing in court in pajamas and bathrobe, drooling and mumbling, while running one of the most sophisticated, disciplined, and profitable criminal enterprises in American history. And when he finally admitted the truth, it wasn't because he was caught in the act. It was because he chose to end performance on his own terms, protecting his family one last time. How many crimes did Vincent actually commit? The full number will never be known, buried with him in a cemetery in Greenwich Village. How many murders did he order? Estimates range from dozens to over 100, but the truth died with his victims. How many other mob bosses copied his tactics, feigning illness or insanity to avoid prosecution? That remains a mystery, though prosecutors suspect several tried and failed. Did the justice system learn from his deception? Laws around mental competency were changed, standards tightened, but whether they're enough to stop the next Vincent Gigante is still debated in law schools and courtrooms. And the question that haunts law enforcement journalists and true crime enthusiasts to this day: was Vincent Gigante a criminal genius who manipulated the system with ruthless brilliance, or was he just lucky enough, patient enough, reckless enough to exploit its weaknesses for 30 years? So what's your verdict? Criminal genius who outsmarted the FBI for 30 years, or lucky coward hiding behind insanity? Drop your theory in the comments. And if this story blew your mind, hit subscribe. Next week, the hitman who killed 200 people and walked free. How did he do it? You won't believe what happened next.